When I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was just starting my career, I used to go and meet every morning with an Orthodox rabbi whose shul was right on the way to where our congregation was. And early in the morning, I would meet with him before work, and we would study Talmud. Because I really wanted my Talmud skills to be as good as his, as good as anyone's. I mean, they're not, but I wanted to improve a great deal. And he was willing to help me, and they don't really focus on that so much in Hebrew Union College, and so I really wanted to bulk up there. So I would meet with him every morning, and I had to endure his, I'd say, lack of appreciation for Reform Judaism as we studied together, and seemingly everything that we did he thought was kind of a joke. He didn't really appreciate it. We got along because, other than that, he was, I guess, pretty nice, but I would always tell him what I was doing. He would never seemed quite thrilled. And one day I had something to tell him. I said, I am leading a trip to Israel. How could he not be in favor of that? So he said, really? What are you going to do when you get there? I'll bring you the itinerary. So I brought him the itinerary, and we were going through it. And he's like, oh, you're going there? You know, pretty much for everywhere we were going. So when I showed him our entrance to Jerusalem, and we go to this overlook in Mount Scopus near Hebrew University, where I'm sure many of you have been, to view the city of Jerusalem. And we would make l'chaim and have these weird fruits that the tour company provides. I'd been sitting under the bus for 3 days until we were ready for them. And we would make l'chaim. And he said, why you do that? Don't you do kriya? I said, excuse me? He said, don't you do kriya? You know, when you take the ribbons at a funeral and you tear it or you cut your clothes, the halacha, Jewish law, is if you haven't seen Jerusalem for 30 days, since it's been destroyed, since the end of the Second Temple period, the tradition is to do kriya, to mourn for Jerusalem. And I said to him, I'm taking a bus full of people who've never seen Jerusalem in their lives, and you want me to start a funeral? No, this is one of the greatest moments of their lives. But it's the tradition. The tradition is, for the Jewish people, that Jerusalem lay in ruins. And even since 1967, since the temple is destroyed and lays in ruins, and all we have left is 1.5 walls or so, we do kriya. We tear our clothes or wear those black ribbons. So why is this? Is 2,000 years ago that the temple was destroyed. What is Tisha B'Av, and why is the tradition to fast beginning this year, tomorrow night, through sundown on Sunday? If you think about the destruction of the first temple, after the first temple was destroyed, what was the theological reaction of the Jewish people? They had a much different reaction than any other nation in the world. Because any other nation of the world who lost a war would very simply say, back then, 2,500 years ago, their God was stronger than our God. And their God overpowered our God, and so we lost. It happens. But the Jews can't say that because we don't believe that anyone else has a God. So how could this godless nation beat us? We have a God. So it must mean that our God's not very happy with us. And he allowed them to defeat us. So this is the theological frame of where the Jewish people were after the first temple, but they had prophets back then. And Jeremiah came and said, in 70 years you shall return. And 70 years later, the Persians conquered the Babylonians, the Purim story happened, the Persians told the Jews, you can go back, like clockwork, 70 years, start rebuilding the second temple. Okay, fine. Predictable. We knew what the prophets were going to say, and it worked out. But then, 500 years later, in the year 70 CE, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. So the Jews said, we've been here before. This doesn't scare us. We'll just wait the 70 years, and we'll come back and rebuild the temple. So they waited the 70 years. Nothing happened. The greatest rabbi of the day, Rabbi Akiva, said, don't worry, the Mashiach is here. The Messiah is here, his name. is Bar Kokhba. And just about 70 years later, Bar Kokhba led a revolt against the Romans, and they expected that it would be the same result as what happened after the first 70 years, but this time it was different. The revolt was crushed horribly. The Jews were kicked out of Israel, not to come back for a long time. And 70 years became 700 years, became 2,000 years, and all of a sudden the Jewish people realized, we may never come back. But then we did come back. It took a long time, but we came back. And when we came back in 1948 and then in 1967, we as Jews could realize one thing. There's no pattern. There's no schedule. There's no plan we can rely on. We don't know what's going to happen next to us. And none of us really do know what's going to happen next to us. There's so much in life that we cannot predict. And just as the Jewish people could not have predicted that it would take 2,000 years to return to the land of Israel, we see in our lives the things that we can't predict. Who would have thought that Corona would have played out the way that it did? And now that it's over, it might be starting up again. Certainly no one on the planet was aware that there was a building in Surfside that was about to collapse and change the future of so many families irreparably. Who could have foresaw that a country formed on a tiny slice of land in the most hostile neighborhood in the world 73 years ago would today be one of the 10 strongest nations in the world? You know, there's a great scene from one of my favorite movies. I watch this movie almost every night. I don't know if you have the same cable package as I do, but with Uverse, I have, 37 HBOs. I have HBO Comedy, HBO for Women, HBO Family, and then I have one channel that's called HBO Charlie Wilson's War. Because every night I turn it on, and there it is, Charlie Wilson's War. Some nights they show Munich, but mostly it's Charlie Wilson's War. You know this movie? I said, no? It's on every night. Well, there's a great scene from this movie, which is basically considering the irony of the Afghani rebels who are aligned with us in our fight against the Soviets, but just a few decades later became one of our worst enemies in our country's longest war. There's a little boy on his 14th birthday who gets a horse. And everyone in the village says, how wonderful, the boy got a horse. But the Zen master, who's like the Hasidic Rabbi of the village, says, we'll see. 2 years later, the boy falls off the horse, breaks his leg, and everyone in the village says, how terrible. The Zen master says, we'll see. Then a war breaks out, and all the young men have to go off and fight, except for the boy, because his legs are all messed up, and everyone in the village says, how wonderful. And the Zen master says, we'll see. On Tisha B'Av, we fast, we mourn, we mark it every year, not because of what happened to our people, but because of the consequences that we live with because of what happened to our people. Because of the apprehension that we now live in the world that we live in, that we never know what's going to happen next. Even when we feel the most secure living here in the United States, or even more so in our bubble here in the Pinecrest, South Dade area, even when there's a safe and secure Israel, do we really ever know what's going to happen next? Isn't it clear to us by now that with a destroyed Jerusalem and Jews scattered all over the world, even today, we can never be sure what our situation is going to be? This happened to Moses in this week's Torah portion. There's a word that's used in the first chapter, in the 12th verse of the book of Deuteronomy, as we begin this new book on this Shabbat, Parashat Devarim, Deuteronomy, that Moses says, how can I alone bear your strife? And he uses a word in Hebrew that maybe you are familiar with, or maybe if not, you will hear tomorrow night. He uses the word echa. Have you heard this word before, echa? Echa in Hebrew means how. But it's the name of the book that we read on Tisha B'Av, the book of Lamentations, which, according to tradition, was written by Jeremiah, who witnessed the destruction of the first temple. So Moses uses this word echa, saying, how could this be that I alone have to bear the strife of all of the Jewish people? Now, what's the difference when by the way, we always read this Torah portion the week of Tisha B'Av. So this word comes here, and we'll see it on Tisha B'Av. It's unusual. Not only is the word there, but it's the name of the book, echa, Lamentations. What's the difference, though? During Lamentations, when Isaiah and Jeremiah are saying, echa, how could this happen? Echa means how. How could this happen that we are fighting with each other as Jews, that Jerusalem is being destroyed? How could this be? And we understand it because times are terrible. The Babylonians are about to conquer Jerusalem. They've already broken through the outer walls. Of course they say, echa, how could this be? But when Moses says it in this week's Torah portion, it's harder to understand. It's explained by one well-known rabbi, a 16th century Italian rabbi named Ovadia Sforno, who explains it this way when he says, for Moses, everything was going well. The Babylonians weren't about to attack. The Jews were safe and secure in the wilderness. They had all the food they wanted that rained down from heaven. They had just defeated Egypt, the strongest nation. They were on their way to Israel, and everything should have been great. And still Moses says, echa, how can I alone bear your strife? So what does that mean? Why would he say, how alone could I bear your strife when everything seems to be going so well? Well, let's go back to Exodus. Remember what his father-in-law told him when Jethro gave him some great advice? He said, you know, Moses, you're doing too much. You need to appoint some other people to be the judges. So we did. Thousands of them. And they started judging all the people. So by the time we get to this week's Torah portion in Deuteronomy, Moses looks around and he sees, boy, these Jews are litigious. This temple Beth Am, we're not the first Jewish community made up of exclusively of lawyers. I mean, one or two doctors, but almost all of you are lawyers. This happened in the wilderness. Everybody was constantly going to court with everybody else. Everyone was constantly quarreling with everyone else. And Moses said, if we're at peacetime, no one here even owns land. We don't even have a land. We're wandering around the wilderness. No one even owns anything. And all we do is fight with each other. Echa. That will be our downfall. Just like Jeremiah and Isaiah said, echa. Echa means the Jews fought against each other so much that when the other nation without a God came to destroy them, their God said, if you're going to fight with each other all day, I'm going to allow them to destroy you. Echa, that's what happened. And Moses had a vision in this week's Torah portion. Echa, if you continue to fight with each other, this land that I'm taking to you, you're not going to last there very long. And by the way, he was right. You know, at weddings, at the end of the wedding, before the kiss, we smash a glass. Right? I use the same joke every wedding. I always say, if he smashes the glass, well, you'll mazel tov, and if he misses, we have to start over. It gets a laugh every time. People have been to 12 weddings I've done. It's a great line. I mean, maybe tonight you didn't like it, but at weddings it fits perfect. But what is that glass? Why do we smash it? We smash the glass because the shards of the glass remind us of the destruction of the Holy Temple and all the different bricks and all the different remnants of the temple that were destroyed. If you go to Israel today, and you go to Jerusalem where, not right the famous picture of the Western Wall, but a little further towards the south where the Southern Wall meets the Western Wall, there are rocks strewn about all over the place. And it looks messy. And you could ask, why don't they clean that up? And the answer is they left it there on purpose. Because they want you to see when you go to the Western Wall that it's still in ruins. And even though it's really beautiful and it's very powerful, there are rocks strewn about, and they're meant to remind you on purpose. And those are the actual rocks that fell from the building when it was destroyed, that the building is still in ruins. And that's what smashing the glass reminds us of. But the truth is, we do it very quickly because it's a joyous moment and we want to get to the first kiss and get on with the hors d'oeuvres and so forth. But the truth is, it's easy for us to say today, what do I need to smash the glass for? What do I care? It's 2,000 years ago. Some people ask the better question, if we're going to fast on a day of mourning, why not fast on Yom HaShoah, which is still so raw? Then on Tisha B'Av, 2,000 years ago, I don't remember my family so well, right? Who passed away 2,000 years ago when the temple was destroyed. It's easy to say that because it was 2,000 years ago, and even more so because we Jews have returned to the land of Israel. But instead, I think there's a different point. We don't mourn and we don't fast because we had such a connection to the people who were living 2,000 years ago. We mourn and we fast because I think our tradition is saying to us that the consequences of what happened are that now that you've been kicked out of the land, you, the Jewish people, your future remains unpredictable, and it will continue to be that way until all the shards of the Jewish people are united, and even more so, once they are united, unlike in the time of the wilderness with Moses, you Jews stop quarreling with each other. That's a task we haven't seemed to master yet. On Tisha B'Av, we don't mourn so much the tragedies that have befallen our people. We are mourning the internal strife amongst us that allowed such destruction to occur. We pray that someday soon these divisions will be healed. But the truth is that we know that when the sun goes down tomorrow night, we will again begin our mourning. And we will have to recognize the fragile, unpredictable state that we live in will continue to persevere so long as the shards of our people remain divided and filled with strife. I pray that this year, our observance of Tisha B'Av will advance our desire for unity among the Jewish people and afford each one of us a greater degree of security, comfort, and peace as we head to our new year for 5782. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.